everyone, and welcome to the Efficiency Engineers podcast, where we ask the question, is there a better way? My name is Frederik Stallard, and in this podcast, I interview leaders in insurance that challenge the industry's notorious reputation of being slow to change and inefficient. On the show today, we have Gari Gono. Gary is a bit of a nerd who specializes in data and technology in the insurance industry. The last 5 years, he's been with Instandard, a fast-growing cloud solution to build and distribute insurance products, with his current role as program director for their new claims platform. So Gary and I met in Amsterdam last year during the Digital Insurance Agenda, one of the biggest insurance conferences in Europe. We got chatting a bit about claims and stuff, and then he told me he's also running a podcast called No Brown in Town. I have to say it's a really cool podcast. I checked a couple of episodes, so definitely go check it out. He talks a lot about diversity and inclusion. It's a topic dear to my heart as well. So I had to get him on our podcast and talk a little bit about technology in the insurance industry, about digital transformation, and anything that will come up. So here we are. Gary, thanks for coming on the show. How are you?
I'm very well, Fred, and thank you for having me. I've been listening to Efficiency Engineers, and I was desperate to get my views across as well, because I have somewhat of an opinion on this whole digital transformation and just what insurance is about in terms of the way we change and how fast or slow we're perceived to be changing in the industry.
I love opinions, and I think people love if you come at it from a bit of a different angle. So I'm really curious to hear. But before we do so, maybe tell us a little bit more about yourself, things that I haven't mentioned that people should really know about the person Gary.
Yeah, no, I think you've actually really managed to capture me in a few sentences really well. So, from a career perspective, I was kind of born and raised in insurance technology. So my very first job was working for Zurich Insurance on the kind of IT side, and working on the architecture side and looking at how we could deliver, technology better for the company. Then I left and I went to Deloitte, where I consulted at multiple different sort of tier 1 and tier 2 insurers, looking at how they could transform their technology landscape really. And then the last 5 years I've spent time at Instandard, where we did design and build a policy administration platform. Sort of were really the leaders in the no code insurance software, but now everyone's doing it, so that's not really a USP anymore. But yeah, we spent time, we've kind of grown in the last 5 years, managed to secure 45 million in a Series B, which was really tough. And I'd love to have a conversation with anyone who wants to know what going through a Series B is like, because it's pretty tough. And now I'm here on the Efficiency Engineers talking about transformation in my journey to get here.
Awesome, Gary. So tell us, how did the Series B impact you in your job, basically?
Yeah, so before I was program director, as you've mentioned, I was the head of solutions for the company. So my role really was looking at the product, the roadmap for the product, how the product fits in the market, and what we needed to do to the product to get it, to where we wanted it to be. And from a Series B point of view and a fundraising point of view in general, investors are always curious to know where you want the product to go. And, if we give you X amount of money, what is it you're going to be doing on this product? What's your vision? Where is it going to land? And, if you don't have investors in the room, sometimes your vision isn't scrutinized as much as you might need it to be. So it's always really refreshing to get people with an outside perspective coming in and saying, that doesn't make much sense. That vision is a little bit too ambitious or not ambitious enough. So it was really, really interesting, but pretty tough to have to, defend your vision in front of people who have the money.
Yeah, I completely relates, as I around this time last year was also on the road for fundraising for Paperbox, talking to a lot of investors, for me for the first time. So it was a big learning opportunity as well. Like how does this dynamic work between VC and then an early stage startup? And eventually we decided not to raise, as we had some good revenue coming from our first customers, and we had kind of a perspective on being profitable. So we decided not to raise. But in the end, it wasn't a wasted use of my time, because I learned so much from going in like conversation with these investors that are challenging you on vision, strategy, go to market, things related to your product. How do you differentiate? How do you look at these competitors and so on? So it was super interesting. And I think it's yeah, in that sense, it's a healthy practice, kind of having someone keeping you accountable for the decisions you're making, because in your head it always all makes sense, but if you have to explain it at some point, it kind of you feel where you fall through the cracks.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I've seen a few startups, who didn't need the cash, still take a little bit of cash from VCs purely for the experience that they bring to the table as well. So, like you say, it's a very worthwhile process to go through, whether you raise money or don't. There's a lot of experience and exposure that those companies have had that's worth having on the table.
Yeah. Is this something you would ever want to do? Like being like starting your own thing and then going fundraising?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I think about a lot, but I think because of the experiences I've had, I scrutinize my own ideas quite severely. So I talk myself out of every single idea that I ever have, and I'm like, oh, that will never work. I'm just no one wants that. No one wants to buy that because I'm so used to being on the side of having to scrutinize everything, and it's a lot easier when it's someone else's idea.
That's true. But if you want to do it, you know what they say, right? Don't wait for the perfect idea, because
That is true.
eventually what you build is gonna be it's gonna end up completely different from what you had envisioned at the start.
It's very true. Maybe I'll just package up Chat GPT and start selling it to people as my own idea. I don't know.
So talking about insurance, digital transformation. Tell us from your experience, why is this so difficult? I mean, I'm coming from the tech background. I've been trying to change the way insurers and brokers work in their central administration around their mailboxes, around the receiving of post. It's going well. We're making steps, but I do have, and you can challenge me on that. But I do have a feeling there's a lot of talk. Like you have a lot of ideas, and I don't know. We do innovation. We do this data here, data there. But then when it comes down to it, you have only a few people that are actually moving that have the courage to move. Now, I don't want to make this sound too bad either, because obviously a lot has changed over the last couple of years. But I'm also a nerd. I'm coming from the tech perspective. I'm like, okay, let's get this over with. Let's get this done, and then you feel it's not so easy. So what is this about? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, everything I'll say, I don't even think it's groundbreaking, right? Because everyone knows transformation from a digital perspective is needed within the insurance industry, and probably not just insurance, across many different industries that have existed for a long time. Um, we know it's needed. Everyone talks about it. And to your question, why is it so difficult? Why does it seem like nothing is moving? And if I was to predict, 2023, it's going to be the same. We're all going to talk about how transformation is needed, and we're going to see the same results with very little moving in what we consider to be the positive direction. So, in the sense of what's going wrong, when I really think about it, it's easy to talk about, as I've said, but what people don't consider is the amount of legacy that exists, and how that impacts how we can transform this legacy. So an analogy I usually try and use, it's saying, if you're moving house, if you're renting and you've lived in the house for 6 months or so, moving house doesn't seem such a daunting task because you have 6 months worth of stuff to move with you. It can be pretty routine. And if you were moving house every 6 months, you'd be pretty used to it. It'd be pretty routine. You'd know exactly what you need to do. But now think about your grandparents or your great grandparents in a house that they've lived in for 90 years or 70 years, and you start thinking about moving. There's a lot of stuff to shift, and there's a lot of stuff that you'd forgotten about. So if someone said to your grandparents or great grandparents, hey, you need to move house and you've got to do it in the next day, that's pretty difficult. And I feel like that's the same approach we seem to be taking with transformation in insurance, we're looking at it going, actually, everything is really terrible. Not terrible, but everything is below, the optimal standard it could be. We need to change it right now. And, when you start looking at the tenures that most executives in some of these companies have, it's quite short. It's 2.5 to 3 years, and people move on because everyone's thinking about their next job. So everyone kind of looks at it and goes, I need to move in the next 2.5 years. I need to do everything in the next 2.5 years. And it's difficult. There's, decades of data, decades of processes that have been put in place, and you're not going to unpick that in 2.5 years. So what we really need is patience and a long program. But again, that's really difficult because us tech guys have been coming in for however long and saying, hey, we can change everything really quickly. Our tech is the best and it will absolutely revolutionize your way of working. And we've had to say that to sell the technology, or at least to get buy-in on the technology. Coming in and saying, yeah, this tech is really good, but you'll really start to see a difference in 5 years, doesn't get you the deal. But now you've got an industry of underwriters, claims professionals, brokers, everyone else who's sitting there thinking, these tech guys come in every time and tell me they're going to change my world. I am so tired of buying stuff and my world not changing, because a lot of projects fail. And again, I think it's because we look at the scope and the time and we try and push everything very, very quickly, when we just need to be realistic and say, this is a 10-year transformation and this is how it's going to move along. And I think that will sort of get us somewhere closer to where we need to be with the digital transformation, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, I think it does. So, are you saying that roadmaps should be longer as well? Like we should,
Absolutely,
yeah.
because if I look at it from a tech perspective, if I was, so what I've been doing for the last 5 years, if I'm coming in and saying you need to implement in standard, it's really easy for me to look at something really greenfield, because that's my perspective as a tech guy. I don't have the baggage that the underwriters carrying or anyone else. So if I'm coming in and saying, actually, if you implement this greenfield, you can be done in 4 weeks. That is true. But as the insurer or whoever is distributing as the broker, I'm looking at it going, I've got all these processes and all this data for all these existing customers, all these existing policies that I have, that I now need to shift. How am I going to shift that into this new technology? And, as we've learned over time, data migrations are not the simplest thing. Process migrations are not the simplest things. So if we're a little bit more realistic about how long it takes to transform the process from the old to the new, I think we'll start to see a lot more success, because people won't get to that 2-3 years and go, this isn't working. Let's just accept it to be money lost and let's move on and try the next thing. And then we end up in these cycles where we just do 2-3 year projects that don't deliver the end result we're looking for.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then we didn't even mention the people migration.
Yeah,
Sounds a bit funny, but I mean in the context of transformation projects, I love how Claire Knight at one of the previous conferences, she was in a panel and she mentioned, but we shouldn't forget tech is easy, people are hard.
absolutely. And I've got a lot of time for Claire as well. And I think what she says absolutely rings true. And something I've been saying for years, right? Which is, everything is easy until you get people involved. Um, and I think sometimes from a techie perspective, that's what we forget, because what we care about is the technology, right? If I look at Paperbox, I look at that and think, wow, as a technology, that's incredible. I can absolutely sort my mail. I can really have that digital AI powered postbox. That's amazing. And then I put it in front of people and they go, well, I like to put my post this way and I like to do it this way. Now, actually, you know what? I prefer just doing it myself. It gives me a sense of control. And you think, this should be so easy. The technology does what you need it to do, but it's hard to change people and it's hard to get people moving along on the journey as well.
Definitely. So if we're talking about longer roadmaps, um, I'm wondering how can techies like us work better with the right people, because in the end, what is really challenging is if you are responsible for a longer roadmap and transformation. Let's say you're responsible for the underwriting function, chief underwriter. You need to have a vision of where you want to go, but for that to happen, you need to have like a really strong understanding. Like last recording, it's not live yet, but it will be soon, was with David King from
Oh,
Artificial,
okay.
and we
Yeah.
talked a little bit about ChatGPT and how like the underwriting function is going to really be turned around on its head. But the challenge is if you don't fully grasp the extent of of these technologies, it's very hard to put um, in very concrete terms, like how should we be moving along this roadmap. Even though you shouldn't predict the future, it's kind of iterating, going here and there. You need some core principles, but at some point you well, continuously you need techies to keep steering that. But how do you propose as techies can do a better job of playing that role?
Yeah, it's a really good question and a really important one as well, because I think that's why good strategists are expensive. Because part of that road mapping is looking at what value you can harness on the way. So part of the thinking is when we look at roadmaps, we need to stop thinking of the last step as the point where you get all, where you get value. So you need to be getting value all the way through that roadmap. So when we look at, right, I've got to transform my underwriting business, and if I'm bringing in, if I'm looking at something like ChatGPT or any of the other incredible AI tools out there, and if I just think, wow, I could absolutely turn my underwriting function on its head, it's really hard to just go in tomorrow and go, here's ChatGPT, change everything. Because people, as techies, we need to be taking people on that journey and telling the story, right? And when we look at our roadmaps, we need to be saying, right, we understand your whole problem, right? Your whole problem might be, it might even be something not as well defined. It might be that for different types of business where they get submissions, maybe it's taking too long to get quotes back to brokers and any other distributor. So you might be thinking, okay, that's my ultimate problem. Break that down into multiple steps and go, right, okay, I get a submission and it's different, file types. Sometimes they're not organized. Okay, if I could just organize the files that I get in the submission much more quickly, right, now I can look at them much more easily. And even if it's a human doing that, so that might be step one, right? Organize the submissions. So you organize those, and that could be your project for the next 6 months or however long it needs to take in your organization. And you might even break that down even further and take really, really small chunks, start getting that value, and then going, right, okay, now I've cracked this and I've got 6 months, I've done that in 6 months. And it makes people happy, right? Delivery makes people happy. It might be small, but everyone goes, wow. And for a lot of these tech, like the techie people in these companies, you then get into that point of people start to get that trust, like, wow, IT said they were going to do this, and they did, which not many IT departments get the luxury of hearing from people anymore. So you pick something small, you deliver that, and maybe now you've organized all the submissions, and then you actually say, right, I get a lot of PDFs where I have to copy the data or retype the data into something else. And you think, right, okay, maybe I'll automate that. So now I'm not actually having to go into each and every PDF and like copy the important bits. So you just take it step by step, and but at each point you're delivering some level of value, right? So your ultimate goal might be, it takes us 10 days to return a quote to a broker right now, and we want to get that down to a day. But your steps might be, actually now it takes 9 days, now it takes 9.5 days, 9.5, 9, 8, and you keep going that way. And that's really the best way you're going to get to the end goal. But you can't eat an elephant in one sitting, as we keep trying to do.
Um, Also, the IT function has significantly changed over the last few years. Like initially, corporate IT was kind of a big cost point for companies, and then responsible for all of the gear, all of the hardware, making sure there's a stable internet connection, and then maybe security stuff, right? It's kind of those guys. But right now, if you're in a senior leadership role, you need IT to achieve your goals, because you want to bring that quotation time down to from 10 days to maybe 5 days or less. In no way you'll be able to achieve that without technology. Or at least, I mean, there's process transformation, there's attracting the right people, but you can't go around it. You need technology. And I think this is also kind of a paradigm shift that companies are starting to get or have already gotten. And those who were faster in the process of realizing that IT strategy should become part of business strategy, I think they are a little bit ahead, probably.
Absolutely. And I think, again, I keep saying all these things that are wrong, but I think it's practical for people to think about because I think, when you look back, it used to be you have a business strategy and then you have a tech strategy or an IT strategy. And again, when you let tech people like myself and you get in a room, we look at it and we go, "Oh, what's the coolest tech out there?" And then, I look at it and I go, I've got a solution, right? Now I'm going to go and find a problem for this solution, like blockchain as an example. And we can have a separate podcast where we debate the usefulness of blockchain and insurance. But, it's exactly that. It's, wow, I have this really cool technical solution. What problems can I apply it to? But I think, like you say, the people who are ahead are sitting there going, right, this is what my business is trying to achieve. And how do I achieve that? And it's not about what tech only can I bring in. It's looking at it from a whole enterprise level. It's, using that enterprise architecture function for what it's supposed to be. What offices do I need? What people do I need? What processes do I need in place? Oh, and what technology could help me in achieving my goal, but never forgetting what the actual business goal is. Because, in days gone by, you could have a problem, and if you tell the IT team, actually, we're not going to use tech for this because we know if we hire this person at this much money, it's a lot cheaper and a lot quicker than having a system in place. It's really hard for us as techies to hear that, because it's like, no, technology is the answer. I don't care what the question is. The answer is technology. And we need to sort of get out of that mindset and start just looking at the problem on its own and seeing how best we solve that.
If you were a head of claims of a larger organization, and you consider that you don't have the technical depth that you have,
Yeah.
How would you approach that in terms of pulling close to you the person who have the technical depth? Would you rather go to suppliers? Would you hire for that, or do you have other ways to approach it?
Yeah, I think it'd have to, for me personally, it'd have to be someone internal. Whether they sit within the claims organization or not is a completely different debate. But it'd have to be someone who is within the company, shares the vision, shares the pain, and has the incentive as much as I do to solve the problems that we do. So, a lot of organizations will have that as their chief technology officer. But it has to be someone who's invested in the mission, the goal, and the vision for the company, who feels the pain that you feel as well, in order to they just think of things from a different perspective, because I'd be thinking of it from a claims perspective and thinking, right, this is what I need my department to be doing, and I would need that person within the team, broader team, who can actually say, and this is how technology can help you, but not someone who just looks at it and thinks technology is the answer to every question, which, like I say, a lot of technical people, I've been guilty of this at times, we tend to do, we were too excited about the possibilities of technology.
I love how I don't know if you know Hub Insurance. They're a broker in the UK, like pretty really fast growing, pretty young company. We had Mark Costello on the podcast for the first recording, and they recently, so I think they're no, I'm not sure, but let's say they're not even with 30 people. Uh, they recently hired their own internal head of AI, which I think is very telling for the way they aim to run things and run digital transformation and really be a leader in this broking market when it comes to providing the tech stack that is needed to create the best and most transparent customer experience. And even, I mean, if it, whether it's AI or some other technology, that doesn't really matter. But just the fact that they bring in someone like this, and I had a chat with him. It's called Ian Wade, I believe. He's coming also from the business strategy point of view. He's like, okay, I know a lot about technology. I've seen different things in the industry, but let's look at this business and what we aim to achieve, and then what are the, let's say, the smallest, most feasible steps we can take right now that make the biggest impact. And I think that's probably the way to go about it.
Yeah, and then I think that that's the right way to look at it, at least from my perspective. Because I was having a chat with a friend recently, because we're actually going to start writing a blog around how you can tackle some of the key data issues people have. Because, like I say, from a technology point of view, it's pretty straightforward. But I say pretty straightforward. It's pretty hard, but it's relatively straightforward, compared to solving everything else. Um, and my friend and I were talking about how you see a lot of people being hired these days as data scientists for companies, and companies seem to have this view that if I just get a data scientist in, then all my problems are solved, right? Like, data science is the new thing, it's amazing, it's going to solve everything. But a lot of these companies don't know what the question they have is. They just get someone in, say, tell me the answer, and you've got these data scientists going, but what's the question? And they're like, oh, I don't know, like, figure out the question and then tell me the answer. And that's pretty hard to do. So I think it's really awesome when you see companies like you're talking about, where they actually have people looking at the business strategy and going, right, how am I going to apply, like, I'm going to go and find answers to these questions you have, rather than just coming in and trying to give some answer with no question.
Yeah, no doubt that data scientists are capable of amazing things. But what you often see is that it's kind of, data science is kind of the sexy niche in IT.
Yeah,
And then you get these people who like to work on really cool stuff, and they'll come up with the most amazing ideas and projects to work on, but they might not always contribute to the business goals or business success. It's and then if not managed well, like if the data team is not really going through the organization, then you have this kind of siloed, probably expensive data science department that are doing amazing stuff. Maybe you can write blog posts about it, etc. But I think it's key to make sure that they are actually working on the business rather than working on data science projects, to put it that way.
exactly. And like with everything we've talked about, when you look at AI, just even the smaller things in data science, even just the data engineering side, organizing your data, making sure you're getting data in the right way and cleaning up your data. There's a lot of technology out there now that lets you solve this. So from if I'm delivering a data transformation project or anything, that's almost the easy stuff now. But understanding the problem you're trying to solve, that's a lot more difficult.
Yeah. So I started out my career as a machine learning engineer, right? But I was coming from a not completely technical background, like kind of half half. And I landed in this environment of really smart engineers, like computer scientists, doing machine learning stuff. It was very exciting for me. Um, I guess if I would have been really good at coding, I would still be a machine learning engineer. But I ended up doing different things. But I also felt at that point, like, if I wait long enough, probably technology is going to catch up with me, and I'll be able to be a machine learning engineer again, because it's kind of commoditization of AI, right? You have all these APIs working for you, and you can build stuff. So that's what I'm waiting for. And ChatGPT is a perfect example. You can make like really cool language applications now with these kind of things.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked about it quite a lot so far, but I'd just give a warning to everyone. Like, ChatGPT is like that annoying know-it-all friend. Even when it's wrong, it presents it to you like this is absolutely the right answer. So you still need to be, quite careful when you're using that technology as well, at least in this day and age.
Definitely, definitely. I really like the analogy of moving houses as well. So it kind of reminded me of imagine you're moving houses after 20 or 30 years. You have a lot of stuff. You're going to the new house. My feeling is the more you're able to let go of what you have and like just dump it, the faster the move. Can we also project this back on insurance transformation projects? Like, is that? I mean, within Standa, you're it's like core processes. So you must have had some experience with kind of challenging existing pieces of software, pieces of technology that must have cost a lot for the insurance company, and then you're coming in and you're saying like, hey, shouldn't you replace this with something newer, cloud-based, etc. And then this is all about like mindset and sunk cost, right?
Absolutely, because one of the things that annoys me the most is where people go, well, this is how our existing system does it, right? Or this is how we've always done it. This is how it works now. And going back to the analogy of moving house, if I've got a loft in my house that I live in now and it's full of crap, if I can say that, if I move to a house with no loft and I'm like, well, the old house had a loft, I'm either going to spend loads of money building a loft just to store all the crap that's not needed because it's in the loft. I don't use it at all. Or I could say, actually, I'm going to get rid of this because it's completely unnecessary stuff that I'm just carrying around for no good reason. And that's the same. You see this with processes all the time. There are processes that have been put in place to get around some of the limitations of the existing systems, and people don't want to let go of those processes. And you try and explain, and you see this all the time, you're trying to say to people, no, because you now have a new process that cuts out all of the waste. You don't need to keep the waste. And it's really tough for people to kind of switch their mindset to go, well, there's this thing I've been doing for 15 years. I guess I just stopped doing it now. Because in some cases, it's become a very key part of people's jobs as well.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Let's talk about something different. So you're wearing, for the listeners that are not watching, so we're also broadcasting this on YouTube. People watching on YouTube, I don't think there are many right now, but they will see a really cool T-shirt that says "More Brown in Town," and
Yes.
They probably have been wondering, like, hey, can you please stop talking about insurance and start talking about what's on this man's T-shirt? So tell us a little bit more about that, Gary, because I've heard the story on another podcast, but it's from a saying, right? It's from a saying in London.
It is. So in London, within the city, there's kind of like the square mile, as people refer to it as, which is full of all these professional people, insurance lawyers, bankers. There's a saying which is "No brown in town." The saying actually refers to the fact that you're not supposed to wear brown shoes in the city because they're deemed to be a little bit too informal, a bit too casual. So for years, if not centuries, this saying has just existed, which is "No brown in town." But when you also look around the city, it's not very racially diverse. So when I was sitting in meetings and people would, joke to other people who've come in wearing brown shoes, and they were saying, well, no brown in town. I was like, that makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable because there are no brown people in town either. As I kind of progressed in my career and started getting more senior and getting into kind of much higher roles and having to interact with executives more frequently, I started to realize that there were not a lot of people that looked like me, whether in the industry or just generally in leadership. So I decided that I would start a podcast called No Brown in Town to talk about the lack of racial diversity and just giving people some practical sort of tips and in some cases mostly opinions on what it's like to not have a diverse workforce, and then giving the story from black and brown people's point of view on what it means to them to be to be at work and not have many people that look like them around them as well.
Yeah. Do you have a web shop where I can buy a T-shirt?
There's no web shop at the moment, but if you DM me, I'll definitely get you a T-shirt. That's
Awesome.
Get the movement spreading.
Sweet. So how has it been for you specifically as a black person in a mostly white environment? For me, I mean, I find this really interesting, but as I told you before this podcast, I don't feel very skilled or yeah, I don't know how to say it talking about these things, but I am curious, like how what is your experience, and is this changing over time as well, or is it kind of a, I don't know, some sort of status quo, hard to change?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. I think many things are changing, which is really good. But some things, are a little bit harder to change. And one of the key things, and you say, you're not very skilled at talking about this. I don't think I am either. I just talk about it. And I think one of the key things for this kind of topic is the fact that people need to talk about it more. Because a lot of people don't want to talk about it because they're scared. They might say the wrong thing, or they don't want to be seen as something they're not, because there's a lot of unlearning we're having to do as a society when it comes to just biases in general, whether it's racial, gender, or disability. There's a lot of unlearning we have to do. So I think the key thing is just making sure we talk about it. And going back to the first part of the question, which is how what it's like for me as a black person in kind of leadership and in the industry we work in as well. It's quite interesting because as I was coming up in my career, like I said, I didn't see many people who looked like me, and I didn't see many people who looked like me at the top. So without thinking about it, it almost impacts what I always felt there were, what my ceiling would be. Now I'm a little bit more confident than some other people would be. And in some cases, a little bit too confident about my skill set, as undeservedly in some cases too.
About that, sorry to interrupt, but I was reading some on another newsletter yesterday that pretty much everyone is just winging it all the time. Like doesn't matter in which position, even if you're the president of the United States, like people are just constantly winging it.
Yeah,
Please,
no,
please,
absolutely.
please go on.
And the key to confidence is realizing that, and realizing that maybe other people don't know as much as you've given them credit for, including myself. Uh, so I think for me, I've had that confidence of, right, okay, I can really push through, and I can be whatever I want to be, and I can get to wherever I need to be. But the more I started climbing up the ladder, the more I started to realize that actually there are some things that are outside of my control, So I'd get comments from people either based on the way I speak, or on some things that I do culturally. Like I might be a lot more relaxed than other people, or appear to be a lot more relaxed than other people. And people would take that to have its own meaning. And, either people think you don't care or whatever it is. But when I was around other people who are from a similar cultural background to me, I was like, oh, I'm actually not that relaxed. Like there are people who are a lot more relaxed than me and seem a lot more laid back and chill than me. But because those people are not in the spaces I'm in, I'm perceived to be like the really relaxed, laid back guy. Whereas actually in some cases when I look back, I'm like, actually no, I'm just the black guy. Um, so I started to realize that there's a lot of things I can't control, how people think and how people feel. And it was important to talk about it, and it was important for people to at least hear my side of it, so that they can, when the next time they see me and they think something, at least in a negative way, they can stop and think for themselves. Actually, would I say that to a white colleague, or would I say that to someone else, or am I actually just confirming my biases by holding on to these views? And that's why I think it's really important to talk about it. Even if we say the wrong things at the wrong times, it's still important to get the conversation going.
Yeah, I can imagine that somehow certain attributes of your personality are then attributed to your skin color, and not always rightfully so. Like one person might be like praised for their relaxedness, and then someone else might be, I don't know, and then suddenly it's a race thing, or whatever. Like people say this about women as well, right? If you're a male figure in the office that is loud and confident, you're seen as a leader. and if she's female, then she's seen as bossy and a
Yeah,
bit
yeah.
nagging or whatever, and then suddenly it becomes like it's attributed to their gender, but it might have nothing to do with their gender, or it has nothing to do with their gender, and then they're just evaluated differently. And I can imagine there's many more things like that for example I would be even unaware of, that you might feel yeah, more days than not.
No, and and it exists everywhere, right? If we were sitting here on a board of a company in Zimbabwe, um, the way I'd be viewed versus the way you'd be viewed would be very different, and a lot of that would be to do with your skin color, right? And in a sense, it's a different topic, and we could talk about it at a different time. But in Africa, like when people look at say white people, it's very it's very positive in a sense. If you stepped into a boardroom in Africa, people are more likely to be like, wow, that guy's going to be really intelligent and really rich. He really knows what he's doing with money. And that might not be true, but they just perceive that because you've walked in with white skin. And, the same thing happens across the world for different races. There's things that people already assume and feelings people already have just because of the way someone looks.
Okay, Gary, so this is a question that I sometimes like to ask my guests as well. So for me, the whole insurance industry is pretty new. I'm coming from a completely different background. I think this has advantages and disadvantages, but I'm always curious for other people, like how did you end up in the insurance industry, and what is driving you to stay there and try to make a difference?
Yeah, so I mean, as with everyone else in the industry, I fell into the industry. And the absolute honesty about that is when I finished university and I was going to start my first proper job, should we say. Um, I was looking for somewhere to live that was near a beach. And that was my only criteria, right? I didn't really care
Mm.
what the job would be as such, as long as it was technology near a beach in the UK. And Zurich Insurance came up, and they were in Portsmouth in England. And so I just thought, right, this is the job I'm going for. I'm absolutely going to do everything in my power to make sure that I get this job because it's near a beach. And then I did. And then I turned up. I should have done a little bit more due diligence because the beach in Portsmouth is pebbles. So it's not a nice sandy beach like I'd imagined it to be. But now I was in insurance, and I feel like once you're in, you're kind of stuck. And for me, what's really interesting and what keeps me in the industry and keeps me thinking about technology for the industry, I could lie and say it's all about all these wonderful problems that we have to solve in the industry. It's partly that, but a lot of it is the money, right? And I don't mean that you get paid a lot of money in insurance, and you probably do relative to other industries, but insurance is an industry that has the problems that it has, but there is a lot of money in the industry. Overall, the industry does quite well, which means there's a lot of resource available within the industry to fix some of these problems that we have. If you're looking at the problems, say, at least I can only speak for the UK, but some of the problems they have in the public sector, it's really hard for them to pay people the big salaries and get the best vendors and get the best talent on board because they're offering around half the amount that the financial services can offer. So the fact that there's the money to get you the resources that you need to make the changes you need to, that's something that's really hard to get away from because it becomes a lot harder trying to solve some of these problems with a lot less money.
That makes sense. And I guess if this money is deployed to attract some talent from other industries to achieve this kind of cross pollination of experience and expertise, then the industry might actually be in a good shape to make a difference over the next couple of years. And I'm happy to be here now because it's probably one of the most human centered industries, and I believe a lot is going to happen still, even though it's not always easy, as we mentioned. We're gonna see big shifts in how this is organized, how it's distributed, and I yeah, I want to see how that will end up, and if possible, contribute to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, with a theme of everything we've talked about, You can have all the money in the world, but you've just got to remember how to use it properly. You've got to learn how to deploy that resource correctly, as you say, and make the changes that we need to do in the way we've talked about. But we're in a much more privileged position within the industry in terms of the amount of resource we're able to utilize.
From listening to your podcast, I learned about the word Zim. So you were on this podcast with this Australian dude, and first couple of minutes always talking about Zim, and I was like, yeah, what are these guys? What are they talking about, Zim? But then throughout the podcast, I got to understand this is short for Zimbabwean. And,
yes, absolutely.
That's cool. So maybe just a final question, like throughout this journey you've been on, this experience, what is something that you had to learn through experience that you were surprised about, and that you think not many other people know or are aware of? Whether it's in this diversity topic or not doesn't really matter, but
I mean, if I take it back to the technology side of things, one thing that I've learned about, and I think is really important, especially for tech leaders to understand, is people know a lot less about technology than you think they do. And for a lot of people, for a lot of executives, or even just people working on the ground, day to day, they know a lot less about technology than you as a technologist might. So there's sometimes a lot of frustration from technologists of why aren't people just accepting this solution? Why aren't people just doing this? And then throughout this podcast, we've referenced ChatGPT a lot. And there will be a lot of people outside of our circles, outside of the community, that listen to a podcast called Efficiency Engineers, who just won't know what that is. So one thing we have to do as technologists is just never assume that people understand the value that technology can bring, because people know a lot less about technology than we think they do.
Yeah, it relates to two questions before. Like I think it's safe to assume that people know a lot less about most things than people assume.
Yeah, everyone's winging it, right? So
everyone's winging it. Thank you so much, Gary. It was a pleasure to have this time with you, to talk a bit about your own experience about insurance, digital transformation, Instando, diversity. I wish you a lovely remainder of the day, and hope to see you soon in London.
Yeah, same to you, Fred. And I'll definitely make a trip out to Belgium just to make sure that I'm out there and having drinks, the better drinks.
Come to Ghent. I know you'll love it.
Yeah, I'm sure I will.